Welcome, friend. I'm glad you've joined me tonight. Before we begin our journey back in time, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know, in the comments, where in the world you are listening from, and what time it is there, right now. It's always fascinating to see how, across so many places and time zones, we all gather here to share these quiet moments of history together. Now, settle in, make yourself comfortable. Let the day fade slowly into the background. Tonight, we'll be traveling to Colonial America, the uncertain beginnings of life on the edge of a vast wilderness, a place where survival was never guaranteed and where comfort was a rare treasure. But we will not rush. We'll move slowly through the rhythms of daily life, through the stories of figures who lived and struggled, through mysteries that remain unsolved, and through the stark contrasts between hardship and privilege. As you listen, you may imagine yourself walking along muddy paths, hearing the creak of wooden doors, or feeling the chill of a draft slipping through rough-hewn walls. You may sense the weight of history settling gently around you, like a blanket, grounding you, steadying you, and easing you into calm reflection. So, let us begin with the simple, difficult, and often overlooked details of everyday life. Daily life in colonial America, the settlers' struggle. Imagine yourself in the early years of the 17th century. You are among the settlers who have crossed the Atlantic, not in search of comfort, but of possibility. The air here is damp and heavy, filled with the scent of earth, wood smoke, and something unfamiliar. The wildness of a land that seems endless. Your shelter is a crude structure hastily built from timber and mud. The roof leaks when the rain falls, and the walls never quite keep out the cold. Nights are long, the silence broken by distant howls of animals in the forest. Firelight flickers weakly against the rough boards, casting shadows that stretch across the room. Each morning, before the sun is fully risen, you step outside into the wet grass. Your feet sink into the soil, and the chill cuts through the thin leather of your shoes. You work from dawn until dusk, and still, it seems, there is never enough food, never enough warmth, never enough strength. Water must be fetched from nearby rivers or streams, and even then, it carries risks. Illness spreads easily, often silently, in ways no one fully understands. The body grows weaker, season after season, and hunger becomes a constant companion. In Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement, they would remember a time known simply as the starving time. It was the winter of 1609 to 1610. Supplies were scarce, and the settlers, hemmed in by both harsh conditions and tense relations with the Powhatan people, found themselves trapped. Food stores dwindled until there was almost nothing left. Records tell us that only about 60 of the 500 colonists survived that winter. Day by day, the routine was the same: tending small gardens, hunting in the woods, repairing fragile shelters, and watching the horizon for ships that might bring relief. But the ships often carried more people instead of more supplies. The rhythm of survival was slow, heavy, and exhausting. The tools were simple, the tasks repetitive: cutting wood, hauling water, grinding grain. These were the labors that shaped every hour of the day, and each task was colored by the uncertainty of whether tomorrow would bring sustenance or more scarcity. For women in the colonies, life was no easier. They were outnumbered, their presence scarce in the earliest years, and their work relentless. Cooking over open fires, weaving, sewing, tending to children in conditions where even the smallest illness could become fatal. Every day was filled with chores that had no end, no pause, and no certainty of success. For children, there was little of what we might now call childhood. From a young age, They worked alongside adults, learning to carry burdens, to mend, to fetch, to tend animals. Play was rare. Instead, life pressed on them early, a constant reminder that survival demanded everyone's labor. The seasons brought their own challenges. In the summer, the air was thick with insects, buzzing endlessly, biting at exposed skin. In the winter, frost crept into the smallest cracks of the cabin walls, settling on bedding, making even sleep a struggle. There were moments of reprieve, perhaps a warm loaf of bread, a pot of stew shared among neighbors, but these were exceptions rather than rules. Imagine lying down at night on a straw mattress, the faint sound of wind whistling through wooden shutters. Your body aches from the day's labor, your stomach not quite full. The darkness presses close, absolute, unbroken by any artificial light. You hear the crackle of the fire fading, and with it, the quiet uncertainty of whether the next day will be kinder or harsher still. This was daily life for the majority of settlers. Not battles, not grand speeches, but the slow, repetitive rhythm of survival in a place that seemed determined to resist them. A rhythm that continued year after year, shaping those who lived through it and burying many who did not. And as we step away from these common settlers' lives, we turn now to the story of one person whose life has echoed through history. A figure caught between two worlds, whose name you surely know. Now that we've walked through the rhythm of daily survival, let us shift our focus. From the faceless crowd of settlers, we turn to a single figure whose story has lingered in memory and myth. You know her name, Pocahontas, but her life, lived in the early years of English settlement, was far more complex than the legends that surround it. Imagine yourself near the Powhatan villages along the rivers of Virginia. The forests are dense, the waters wide, and the air alive with the calls of birds. This is the homeland of the Powhatan people, a network of tribes ruled by the paramount chief Wahunsaneka, whom the English would call Powhatan. Pocahontas was his daughter, though not in the sense we often imagine. She was one of many children, not necessarily destined for leadership, but still a figure of importance within her community. Her given name was Amanute, and she carried the private name Matoka. The name Pocahontas was more of a nickname, a playful title meaning playful one, or mischievous girl. Her story, as we know it, begins when she was still very young, perhaps around 10 or 11 years old. During the tense first encounters between her people and the English settlers of Jamestown, one of the most famous episodes is said to have been her saving of Captain John Smith's life. According to Smith's later writings, he was captured and brought before Powhatan, who seemed prepared to put him to death. Pocahontas, the child, rushed forward and placed her head upon his, as if to shield him from the blow. But the truth is uncertain. Some historians believe Smith may have misunderstood a ritual of adoption, or perhaps exaggerated the story later. The details blur with time, as myths often do. What we do know is that Pocahontas became a bridge between two worlds. She visited the settlement at Jamestown, bringing food when famine threatened the colonists. She moved between the English and the Powhatan, embodying a fragile thread of peace, though that peace was never strong enough to last. Years passed, she grew into a young woman, and the fragile relations between her people and the English grew strained. In 1613, during one of these conflicts, Pocahontas was captured by the English. She was taken to Henricus, a small settlement upriver, where she was held for ransom. Her time in captivity changed her life. There, she encountered Christianity and was baptized with a new name, Rebecca. She learned the ways of English society, dressed in English clothing, and lived between two cultures that often seemed at odds. It was here she met John Rolfe, a widowed colonist and tobacco planter. They married in 1614, an event that secured what became known as the Peace of Pocahontas, a period of relative calm between the English and the Powhatan Confederacy. Imagine her voyage across the Atlantic. In 1616, she traveled to England with Rolfe and their young son, Thomas. For the English, she was presented as a symbol of the civilized savage, proof of what they believed could be achieved through colonization and conversion. In London, she met nobles, courtiers, even King James himself. She saw cities larger and more crowded than anything she could have imagined at home. The air was filled with smoke from chimneys, the Thames alive with boats. For the English, she was both a curiosity and a living emblem of their colonial ambitions. But her time there was short. In 1617, as she and her family prepared to return to Virginia, she fell gravely ill at the port of Gravesend. She died at around 21 years of age, far from her homeland, her story cut short. She was buried there, leaving behind a son who would later return to Virginia. Her life has since been retold, reshaped, and romanticized. Yet beneath the layers of legend remains the reality of a young woman caught between two worlds, her Powhatan heritage and the demands of an expanding English colony. She became a figure of peace, of curiosity, of transformation, and of loss. As you reflect on her story, you may sense both the fragility of her existence and the enduring mark she left on history, not through conquest nor through wealth, but through the ways she symbolized connection, however tenuous, between peoples divided by culture, language, and belief. And from her life, we move now into the realm of mystery. For history is not only written in stories we know, but also in the silences, the disappearances, and the unanswered questions. Let us turn next to one such mystery, the enigma of the Lost Colony of Roanoke. History often leaves us with stories that are incomplete. Fragments of the past linger, while the full truth slips quietly away. One of the most enduring mysteries in early American history is the story of Roanoke, the colony that vanished. Imagine yourself standing on a small island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The air is damp and salty, carrying the constant rhythm of waves breaking on the shore. Tall grasses sway in the breeze, and beyond them, dense forests press close, filled with the calls of unseen birds. It was here, in 1587, that a group of about 100 settlers arrived from England. Men, women, and children, families, rather than soldiers, had come to establish a permanent settlement. Their leader was John White, an artist and mapmaker who hoped to build something lasting on this distant shore. For a brief time, life seemed to take shape. Cabins were raised, gardens planted, and relations with nearby native tribes cautiously established. But supplies were limited, and the settlers soon found themselves dependent on ships from England to bring food, tools, and other essentials. John White, their governor, returned to England later that same year to gather what was needed. He expected to come back quickly, within months, but war intervened. England and Spain were locked in conflict, and White found himself delayed year after year, unable to return to the colony he had left behind. It was not until 1593, long years later, that he finally made his way back across the Atlantic. He must have imagined the reunion, stepping ashore, seeing the familiar faces of his daughter, his granddaughter, and the other settlers he had left behind. But when he arrived, the settlement was empty. The houses had been dismantled, carefully taken down, as though the people had not fled in panic but left with intention. There were no signs of violence, no bodies, no graves to mark what had happened. Instead, carved into the wooden posts of the fort were two mysterious inscriptions. One Red Crow, The other, carved more fully into a tree, spelled out Croatoan. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, home to a native people allied with the English. White believed this was a message, that the settlers had moved there. But storms and dwindling supplies prevented him from searching further. He was forced to turn back to England, leaving the fate of the settlers unresolved. And so the colony disappeared from history. No ship ever confirmed their survival. No record emerged of their fate. The people of Roanoke seemed simply to vanish, leaving behind only those carved letters and the memory of their attempt. Over the centuries, many theories have been offered. Some believe the settlers were absorbed into native communities, blending their lives with those already here. Others suggest they perished from famine, disease, or conflict, their remains lost to the shifting sands of time. Still, others imagine more dramatic endings: attacks, storms, or hidden migrations deeper into the wilderness. Archaeologists have searched for traces. Bits of pottery, shards of European tools, scattered remains of settlements have been found in the region, but nothing has yet provided a clear and final answer. And so, the Lost Colony remains a mystery. A story half told, suspended between history and legend. It stands as a reminder of how fragile those first attempts at settlement were. How easily entire communities could disappear, leaving little behind but questions. As you picture the empty settlement, the quiet island, the faint letters carved into the wood, you may feel the same stillness that has lingered there for centuries. A quiet that invites speculation, but never quite allows certainty. From this silence, we will shift now to contrast. If Roanoke speaks of loss and disappearance, our next step will take us into the world of wealth, privilege, and power in colonial America. A world reserved for the few, where the burdens of survival were softened by status and connections. Let us turn to the life of a colonial governor, where the rhythm of days looked very different from that of the struggling settler. Now, let us leave behind the mystery of Roanoke, and walk instead into the world of power and privilege. Not every life in colonial America was defined by hunger, cold, and uncertainty. For a select few, the governors appointed by the crown or by powerful companies, life was very different. Imagine a governor's residence. It is not the rough, leaky cabin of the ordinary settler. Here, the walls are sturdy, the windows glazed with imported glass, and the rooms filled with furnishings shipped from England. The floors creak underfoot, polished boards warmed by woven rugs. On the tables, pewter and silver glint softly in the candlelight. The governor rises in the morning not to fetch water or chop wood, but to the sound of servants already at work. Bread is baked, fires are tended, and clothing is laid out, pressed and neat. The air carries the aroma of coffee or chocolate. Expensive imports, rare luxuries that only the elite could afford. His duties, though weighty, are not physical. He moves through a world of decisions and documents, of meetings with councilmen and letters sealed with wax. He writes dispatches back to England, reporting on crops, trade, and the behavior of the colonists. He enforces the king's laws, levies taxes, and manages disputes, always with an eye on maintaining order, and on maintaining his own position of influence. Outside his house, the colony might be struggling. Settlers might be shivering in thin clothes, or scouring the woods for food. But inside, the governor's dining hall offers a stark contrast. Their tables are laden with meats, breads, cheeses, and wines shipped across the ocean. Spices bring dishes to life, served on fancy plates. Dinner is not hurried. It is a ritual of display, a way of reinforcing status and power. When visitors arrive, English officers, wealthy merchants, or native leaders brought to negotiate. They are received with ceremony. The governor's residence becomes a stage, where appearances of authority are carefully maintained. Curtains of heavy fabrics soften the windows, portraits hang on the walls, and each item declares, "This man speaks for the crown." Yet, beneath the surface of wealth and privilege, there were pressures. A governor was watched closely by both colonists and superiors across the sea. If he failed to maintain order, if he allowed rebellion or disorder to grow, his career and his livelihood could quickly end. Letters might arrive from London with stern warnings, or with instructions impossible to fulfill. At times, governors found themselves resented by the very people they ruled, caught between the demands of the crown and the needs of the struggling colonists. Still, compared to the daily grind of most settlers, his life was one of immense contrast. Imagine, once again, the quiet evening. The governor sits in a high-backed chair by the fire. Candles flicker, casting long shadows across the room. His desk holds parchment, ink, and quills, the tools of governance. Through the window, he can hear the wind, and perhaps the distant creak of the harbor's ships. But his chamber is warm, his belly full, his body clothed in fine fabrics. This was the other face of colonial America. Not toil and starvation, but ceremony and privilege. A world set apart from the ordinary settlers, yet dependent upon their labor and survival. And so we see how colonial life contained these stark contrasts. The fragility of daily existence, the uncertainty of distant settlements, and the privileges of authority. As our journey continues, we will step further out of America and into the wider world that surrounded it. Because, while colonial life was shaping itself along the coastlines of a vast new land, other cultures, empires, and traditions were unfolding in parallel. And from this moment of contrast, we will transition into another chapter of our long night together. But for now, allow your mind to rest gently on the image of that candlelit room. The governor, seated in comfort, as the colony beyond his walls labors on in the cold. As we continue, let us pause to consider not just individuals, but the tapestry of society as a whole. Colonial America was never one single experience. It was a mosaic of contrasts. Poverty and wealth, freedom and bondage, tradition and change. Imagine yourself walking slowly through a colonial town. The streets are unpaved, packed earth that turns to mud after rainfall. Wooden houses line the way. Some small and fragile, others larger, sturdier, with brick chimneys rising above the roofs. You hear the sounds of labor everywhere. The hammer of a blacksmith, the creak of wagons, the murmur of voices in the market. The marketplace is a gathering of contrasts. At one stall, a farmer sells corn, squash, and beans, the staples of the land. At another, imported goods from across the ocean draw curious eyes. Bolts of cloth, tools of fine steel, sugar, molasses, and rum. The air carries the mingled scents of livestock, smoke, and salted fish. Among the crowd, you notice the differences in dress. Some wear plain, coarse clothing, patched and faded from years of use. Others, the merchants and landowners, display coats of finer fabric, waistcoats trimmed neatly, and shoes polished to a soft shine. The divisions of class are visible, not hidden, etched into the very fabric of daily life. And then there were those whose stories were more difficult still. Enslaved Africans, brought against their will, were present even in the early colonies. Their labor was vital to the growth of crops like tobacco and, later, rice. But their lives were marked by restrictions, by a lack of freedom, by the constant shadow of control. Their presence reminds us that the story of colonial America was not only about freedom and settlement, but also about exploitation and inequality. Within the same community, you might see indentured servants, men and women, who had agreed 2 years of labor in exchange for passage across the Atlantic. Their lives, too, were hard. Bound to their masters, they worked fields and kitchens, hoping that when their term of service ended, they might claim a piece of land or a chance at independence. But for many, illness or mistreatment meant they never reached that point. And then, within the same streets, you would find ministers and scholars, men of education, reading from books carried across the ocean. The church bell rings, calling the community together. Religion shaped much of colonial life, guiding not only worship, but also laws, customs, and daily rhythms. For some, it was a source of comfort and structure. For others, particularly those who dissented from the official faith, it was a source of tension and conflict. At the heart of it all was the constant push and pull of survival, ambition, and hierarchy. Farmers bent over their fields, merchants tallied their accounts, servants and enslaved people worked tirelessly, and the elite sought to maintain order and profit. Each life intertwined with the others, yet marked by sharp divisions. The rhythm of a colonial day was not one rhythm, but many. For the farmer, it was the slow cycle of planting and harvest. For the merchant, it was the arrival of ships, the exchange of coin, the flow of goods. For the governor, it was the turning of pages, the sealing of letters. For the enslaved, it was the unbroken chain of labor, day after day. As you walk through that imagined town in your mind, you can almost hear these rhythms overlapping. The clang of iron, the cry of livestock, the laughter of children, the measured steps of those in fine coats, all layered together, creating the soundscape of colonial life. And in this quiet observation, we see clearly the contrasts, the many faces of colonial America, bound together in a fragile balance that would shape the centuries to come. As our journey continues, we will shift from this layered society to the voices of belief and tradition. Because colonial life was not only about survival and social order, it was also deeply shaped by faith, by ritual, and by culture. And so, let us turn next to the role of religion in the colonies, a force that guided daily routines, inspired migrations, and often divided as much as it united. Religion shaped the lives of many who crossed the ocean to build a new world. For some, it was the very reason they came, seeking freedom to worship in their own way. For others, it was simply a structure that gave meaning and order to their daily routines. Imagine the sound of a bell ringing softly across a small colonial town. The air is cool in the early morning, and families step from their homes, walking slowly along dirt paths towards the meeting house. The building is plain. Simple timber walls, small windows, a single door. Inside, wooden benches face a raised pulpit. There are no decorations, no bright colors, no statues or gilded frames. Instead, the space is spare, reflecting the values of a community that believed beauty was found in discipline, not ornament. This is New England in the 1600s, where Puritans sought to build what they called a city upon a hill. Their faith guided not just their prayers, but their laws, their customs, and their entire vision of society. Life was measured by the Sabbath, by scripture, by constant self-examination. Hard work was not only necessary for survival, it was also seen as a form of devotion, a visible sign of godliness. But faith in colonial America was not uniform. In the southern colonies, Anglican churches stood with steeples and bells, more reminiscent of England itself. Their services were more formal, with priests in robes, prayers read from the Book of Common Prayer, and a closer link to the authority of the crown. Meanwhile, in places like Pennsylvania, religious diversity flourished. The colony was founded by Quakers, followers of William Penn, who believed in simplicity, equality, and the inner light present in every person. Their meetings were quiet, without sermons, centered instead on silent reflection until someone was moved to speak. In Pennsylvania, Quakers welcomed others too: Mennonites, Lutherans, Catholics, Jews, making it one of the most religiously diverse colonies of the time. Religion was not only a matter of belief, it shaped community rules. In Massachusetts, for instance, dissent from the established faith could mean banishment. Figures like Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson found themselves cast out for challenging the orthodoxy, forced to seek new homes in Rhode Island and beyond. Thus, even the search for freedom often led to new boundaries, new exclusions, and new divisions. For enslaved Africans brought to the colonies, religion took yet another form. Some were introduced to Christianity by force, their traditional beliefs suppressed. Yet, over time, many blended old traditions with new teachings, creating spiritual practices that carried both memory and adaptation. In secret gatherings, songs and prayers were whispered, a quiet resilience in the face of oppression. And always, religion marked the rhythms of the week. Sunday was a day of stillness. Shops were closed, fields left untended, families gathered, sitting for hours on hard benches, listening to long sermons that warned of sin and encouraged obedience. Even children, restless and weary, were expected to sit quietly, absorbing the words. At night, prayers closed the day. By candlelight, verses were read aloud. Voices murmured softly together in homes where the glow of flame was the only light. For many, this was not only ritual, but comfort, a reminder that even in hardship, life was guided by something beyond the struggles of survival. So religion in the colonies was not one story, but many. It was a source of order, of comfort, of conflict, and of diversity. It brought people together, and it pushed people apart. It shaped laws, guided migrations, and left its imprint on nearly every aspect of daily life. As you let your thoughts drift over these images, the simple meeting house, the ringing of bells, the quiet gathering in candlelight, you may sense how central faith was to the colonial experience. Not always gentle, not always fair, but always present, woven into the very rhythm of existence. And from faith, we turn now to another essential force that shaped colonial America: the land itself, and the endless struggle to wrest survival and prosperity from its soil. In our next segment, we will walk through the farms and fields, the crops and labor, and the ways agriculture defined both freedom and bondage in the colonies. If survival was the heartbeat of colonial America, agriculture was its rhythm. The soil, the seasons, and the endless labor of hands upon the land. These shaped nearly every life, from the humblest settler to the wealthiest planter. Imagine yourself at dawn, in a field along the James River. The mist rises softly from the water, clinging to the grass and drifting low over the earth. The air is cool, damp, and filled with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. In the distance, birds stir, calling faintly as the first light stretches across the horizon. The work begins early, before the sun grows too harsh. For many, that work meant tobacco, the crop that became the lifeblood of Virginia and Maryland. The plants demanded constant attention. Seeds were carefully planted, seedlings transplanted, weeds pulled, pests chased away. Each leaf was watched, nurtured, tended by hands that grew rough and calloused from the labor. Tobacco was not food, yet it consumed the land and the people. It exhausted the soil quickly, forcing planters to push further and further outward in search of fertile ground. It brought wealth to some, but hardship to many. Enslaved Africans and indentured servants bore the weight of the work. Their days stretched long beneath the unrelenting sun. In New England, the land told a different story. The soil there was rocky, the growing season short, farms were smaller, built on persistence rather than abundance. Corn, beans, and squash. The three sisters, taught by native peoples, filled gardens alongside modest plots of wheat, rye, and barley. Livestock grazed on meadows, their milk and meat a steady, if modest, supply. Life here was shaped by subsistence, by families working together to provide just enough to endure. Further south, in the Carolinas and Georgia, rice and indigo became the dominant crops. Rice cultivation demanded intricate irrigation systems, fields flooded and drained in careful cycles. It was grueling work, often carried out by enslaved laborers, who brought with them knowledge of rice growing from Africa. Their expertise shaped the success of plantations, though history rarely recorded their names. Agriculture was more than labor. It was the measure of wealth, the foundation of society. The great plantations of the South rose on the profits of tobacco, rice, and indigo. Large houses overlooked sprawling fields, their owners living in comfort, sustained by the toil of many unseen hands. In contrast, smaller farmers worked their own plots, families rising with the sun, working side by side, and ending the day exhausted but self-sufficient. Seasons gave the land its rhythm. Spring brought planting, summer long days of cultivation, autumn the harvest, and winter a quieter season of repair and preparation. But even in winter there was no true rest. Tools had to be mended, barns patched, and supplies managed carefully against the cold. For native peoples, agriculture was deeply woven into tradition and ceremony. Corn was not only sustenance but sacred, its growth tied to cycles of ritual and community. Their knowledge shaped the survival of the earliest colonists, though over time, conflict and displacement would erode that exchange. As you picture these fields, some modest, some vast, you can imagine the steady rhythm of daily life they demanded. Hands pulling weeds, shoulders bent beneath baskets. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the creak of wooden carts on packed earth, each sound, each movement was part of a cycle that bound together all who lived in the colonies. Whether rich or poor, free or enslaved, the land gave and the land took away. It offered abundance, but it demanded sacrifice. It was the stage upon which lives unfolded, quietly, repetitively, season after season. And so, as our long journey through colonial America nears its close, let us turn to reflection, to step back from the fields, the houses, the stories of individuals, and look at the legacy left behind. Because, even as the people of that time labored, worshipped, and struggled, they were laying foundations. Fragile, imperfect, but lasting. As we come to the end of this long journey through colonial America, let us pause, step back, and consider the larger picture. We have walked through the rough cabins of settlers, the silent mysteries of Roanoke, the candlelit chambers of governors, the crowded marketplaces, the plain meeting houses, and the endless fields where hands toiled from dawn until dusk. Taken together, these fragments form a portrait of a world both fragile and resilient. A world where survival was a constant question, where comfort was rare, and where each day carried with it the weight of uncertainty. And yet, within these struggles, seeds of endurance were planted. The lives of ordinary men and women, often unnamed in the pages of history, were the true foundation upon which the colonies rested. They carried wood, fetched water, planted seeds, cooked meals, raised children, and kept watch through long nights. It was their persistence, repeated quietly day after day, that allowed communities to endure. The contrasts of colonial life remind us how uneven those foundations were. For the powerful, life offered ceremony, comfort, and imported luxuries. For the poor, for the indentured, and for the enslaved, life was labor unending, marked by limits not of their own choosing. This tension between freedom and control, ambition and survival, would shape the future of the land in ways no one could yet foresee. As you reflect on the stories we have explored, of Pocahontas caught between two worlds, of the lost colony vanished into silence, of farmers bending over fields and governors seated in warm halls, you may sense how layered the past truly is. Each life, each choice, each small act of survival or ambition became part of the greater whole. History often remembers the dramatic moments, the battles, the declarations, the speeches. But here, in the quiet details of daily life, we glimpse the true texture of the past. It was not only the extraordinary that shaped the colonies, it was the ordinary, repeated endlessly, like the steady ticking of a clock. Now, as you rest in the present, it is worth pausing to feel the contrast. Your bed is warm, your roof secure, your body free from the uncertainties that once weighed on every breath in colonial America. The darkness around you is softened by the quiet hum of modern life, a far cry from the pitch-black nights and anxious silences of the 17th century. And yet, there is a thread of connection. The fields once tilled, the towns once built, the laws once drafted, all have shaped, in some way, the world you now inhabit. The past is never gone. It lingers in customs, in language, in the very landscape itself. So, as you allow your thoughts to drift, imagine those early settlers settling by firelight, whispering prayers, sharing the little they had. Imagine the governors writing by candle, their pens scratching slowly across parchment. Imagine the faint ringing of church bells on a Sunday morning, or the rustle of corn in the fields. These sounds, these rhythms, belong now to memory. But tonight they have carried us gently toward stillness. And now, as the journey comes to a close, let go of the images. Let them fade softly into the background. Rest in the comfort of the present, grateful for the distance between then and now, and for the calm that surrounds you. And so, our journey through colonial America comes to an end. We have walked through hardship and survival, through mystery and memory, through faith, labor, and the contrasts of wealth and poverty. Each step has brought us closer not only to the past, but also to the stillness of this present moment. As you settle deeper into rest, let the images fade gently. The cabins, the fields, the candlelit halls, allow them to dissolve into quiet, leaving only a sense of calm, of distance, of peace. Remember, you are here now, in comfort, in safety. The struggles of the past belong to history, while your present belongs to rest. And to guide you even further into that calm, I have placed gentle, soothing music at the end of this video. It will carry you softly, like a tide, helping you drift into deeper relaxation and, finally, into sleep. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the music take you where words no longer need to go. Good night.